Good morning, all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari, and I hope that you all must be doing great. So let's start with today's analysis that is going to be for 11th of February 2023. So yesterday we talked about the small satellite launch vehicle D2, and it puts 3 satellites into the low Earth orbit. Apart from that, so we'll be starting with the Adani issue, and that issue goes to the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court calls for SEBI's response over the Adani stock fall because SEBI is the regulator, and to protect the investors, bench asks the board to submit a note detailing the legal and the factual aspects of the regulatory framework for the securities market. So legal and the factual aspects would be looked into, and the Chief Justice of India says that usually this may happen on a small scale, but reports in newspapers say the total loss suffered by Indian investors may go in the range of several lakh crores in terms of the investor value. So, this is as per the newspaper reports, and let's see how things would be unfolding regarding this issue. And so when we talk about the capital expenditure, so resources for the states, they have been raised sharply and under the current budget that was announced. And so we see that asserting that the resources for states, they have been raised sharply in the union budget 2023-24. Finance Minister, she called out the opposition ruled states like Kerala, Punjab, and Himachal Pradesh for hiking taxes on the petroleum products and red flagged the irregularities in the West Bengal's implementation of the central schemes. So it becomes important that how the funds they would be utilized at the ground level. So industrial output rise moderates to 4.3%, and this is for December 2022, and it was 7.3% in November. And despite mining and the electricity production rising at around 10% for a second successive month, as manufacturing growth it faltered from 6.1% to 2.6%. So we see the base effects. They perked up the electricity and the mining, which had grown at around 2.8%. So whenever any sector it is growing at a slower rate, and in the consequent month or the time period, there is even a smaller increase. So because of that base from which we are comparing the figures, even a small increase in the consequent month appears to be a huge increase. So that is what is the meaning of base effect. This is the low base effect basically. And apart from that, Prime Minister he calls to the Daudi Bohra community saying that I am your family member. So Prime Minister inaugurated the Daudi Bohra community's Arabic Academy in Mumbai. And after the inauguration, he took a tour of the center with His Holiness. And so he said that I'm not here as the prime minister, but as part of the family. Visiting you is like visiting my family. Please don't refer to me as prime minister. I'm your family member. So ISRO successfully launches the SSLV D2, puts 3 satellites into the orbit. And yesterday we saw the name of the satellites also. So there was Azadi Sat 2, there was EOS 07, which is basically the 3 satellites. They are Earth observation satellites, and there was one US based satellite. It was Antares Janus 1. So UP is playing a key role in driving India's growth, and there's a global investor summit going on there. And UP has a target of being a $1 trillion economy. So So talking about the process of lawmaking in India, so India's law and order matrix, it needs a reboot. And the annual All India Conference of the Director Generals and the Inspectors General of Police, which was held recently, it witnessed a departure from the past when some aspects they were discussed found their way into the public domain. So this led to an element of controversy over the management of the certain issues, especially on the border, but little else. So in-depth discussion is taking ahead. So proliferation of subjects up for discussion in recent conferences in the presence of increasing numbers of delegates to cover the various subjects, it leaves little scope for any in-depth discussion. And today's security threats, they have an all-embracing character, and there is a crying need for in-depth discussions on the futuristic themes in policing, such as cybercrime, the dark web, then we have the threat from cryptos, there is maritime security, threat from drones, and also the problem stemming from an unchecked social media also. These are some of the, we can say, futuristic challenges in terms of policing. And these are in addition to the subjects such as left-wing extremism, there's counterterrorism, drug trafficking, border issues. So lack of adequate time to discuss all these matters in detail, they tend to undermine both the quality of these debates and their possible outcomes. So paying attention to selection and the skills. So the selection of the personnel to the security agencies, especially the police, also will require a total makeover. So 21st century is proving to be vastly different from the 20th century, and the choice of personnel to man the security agencies requires more high-level attention that has been devoted to this task. So we require more skilled personnel who are technologically skilled, and apart from other skills which are important. And technological advances worldwide, they have meant that human skills of security agencies, they need to be suitably tailored to a world in which internet, social media, and other breakthroughs often provide protesters and agitators an upper hand and often detrimental to the law and order. So that is the same point that was just explaining. So we are seeing the importance of open source intelligence that is often neglected by the security agencies. A vast gap exists at present between the need on how best to utilize the information from open sources. And apart from these problems, there is the presence of multiple security agencies, including in the intelligence areas, so intelligence and investigative agencies, who seldom act with a common purpose. So small is beautiful. Hence, what is clear is that there is a very real need to take a hard look at not only improving the nature of the security discourse, but also on how to bring about changes in regard to the intelligence techniques, investigative methodologies, improving the ground situation, and etc. etc. So in short order, it can be said that there is a case for splitting the annual conference of DGPs and IGPs into two separate conferences at the higher level to discuss the policy related issues, and a separate conference to be held of intelligence and the security specialists to discuss the finer points of methodology, techniques, and acquisition of new skills for current and the future problems. So outcomes would then become more relevant to current and the future security needs. So Supreme Court has to say that the suitability of a candidate cleared by the collegium cannot be subject of judicial review. So this is against the backdrop that recently a name of a lawyer was recommended by the Supreme Court Collegium to the central government to be appointed as a judge in the Madras High Court, and later on a petition was filed against her accusing her of hate speech against the minorities. So the Supreme Court is saying that uh, the appointment or the recommended name it is not a subject of judicial review, and we are clearly of the opinion that this court, while exercising the power of judicial review, cannot issue a writ of certiorari quashing the recommendation or the mandamus calling upon the collegium of the Supreme Court to reconsider its decision. So, to do so would violate the law as declared, as it would amount to evaluating and substituting the decision of the collegium with individual or the personal opinion of the suitability and merits of the person. So the bench it distinguished between the suitability and the eligibility of a candidate zeroed in for the High Court judgeship. So eligibility was based on the objective factors which are given in Article 217 of the Constitution, like about the citizenship and the 10 years experience as a judicial officer or a lawyer in a high court. So suitability of a candidate was the domain of the collegium, as it involved a procedure designed to test the fitness of the person, including her character, integrity, competence, and knowledge. So third Khelo India Winter Games are going to be held in Gulmarg in Jammu and Kashmir. So as per a study, jobs increase in solar and wind energy sector. So basically, more jobs are being created in the renewable energy sector. So the study was jointly conducted by the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, NRDC, that is the Natural Resources Defense Council India, and the Skill Council for the Green Jobs. So you can find out more about the first and the second one. So that can be important for us from the examination perspective. So there's a discovery of lithium deposits in Jammu and Kashmir, which is definitely going to help us in cutting down the import needs, and the find will serve as a major boost to the manufacturing of the rechargeable batteries for smartphones, laptops, and electric cars in the country. So there's a discovery of 5.9 tons of lithium deposits in Jammu and Kashmir, which is a first for India. So here it becomes important to find out where do we find lithium ion deposits in India, if any, because here it is mentioning that this is the first such discovery for us. So you can find out about this thing, and this would reduce the need for imports and improve the employment opportunities. And this is definitely going to majorly boost the manufacturing of the rechargeable batteries. And the lithium inferred resources, they have been established in the Resi district. So there was a presence of bauxite in composite form, and during its processing, lithium was also discovered. So wildlife enthusiasts, they spot 145 species during the first Sundarban Bird Festival. And there's a Sundarban Tiger Reserve in the West Bengal, and So there's a 2-day exercise which ended recently, and it also recorded 6 species of waterfowl. So different species were discovered during this festival. So the center is going to borrow rupees 13,879 crores to boost health infrastructure. So the loan agreements have been signed to augment PM Abhim, which was launched in 2021. So PM Abhim, it was launched to fill gaps in the health infrastructure, especially in the critical and the primary healthcare facilities. So the major initiatives planned under this mission, they include support for the construction of the rural health and wellness centers, establishment of the urban health and wellness centers, setting up of the block public health units, and setting up of the integrated public health labs in all the districts. So this is at the local level. And again, it is very important that we strengthen our primary healthcare infrastructure and the entire system. So the war escalates. We are seeing Russia, it is attacking targets across Ukraine with missiles and drones. And as the war anniversary comes closer, so Ukraine says the Kremlin forces they have escalated attacks in the eastern side of the country, and Moldova claims it had detected a missile traversing its airspace. So Russia says that it will cut the oil production over the Western Cap. So definitely it would again impact the economy is dependent upon Russia for its oil imports, because cut in the oil production would further escalate the oil prices. So we'll take up the Financial Express now. So Adani's, they face a fresh storm. So obviously SEBI would be probing the FPO investors. So it is under scanner, and SEBI is looking into the relationships between Adani and Mauritius-based firms, Great International Tusker, so which participated as anchor investors among others. So any entity related to a company's founder or the founder group is ineligible to apply under the anchor investor category. And regulator also checking roles of investment banks, Lara and Monarch, to rule out conflict in share offering process. So the government is committed to cutting down the fiscal deficit to 4.5% by financial year 2026. And this budget was pro-poor. It balances growth with the fiscal prudence. So these are the words of a finance minister. And public capital expenditure on the projects immediately creates a lot of jobs, as we have talked about the multiplier effect that the capital expenditure is going to have. And therefore, it triggers better income and consumption. So this is a well-established route in terms of multiplier for the capital expenditure. So the wheat export ban is likely to continue, government to scale up its procurement. And when we have a look at the wheat inflation, so it is, as of now, it is constantly increasing. And here you can see in the form of this graph as well. So the youth have to move from being job seekers to job creators. We must see how education can reach the last person. Only then India can regain its status as a Vishwa Guru, the guiding light of the world. So these are the words of a Union Minister for Education. So this article is regarding the new draft of the data protection bill. So while considerably abridged, it leaves out a lot of much needed specifics required for effective preservation of citizens' privacy. So here, basically, it is saying that there is applicability to the manual data. So no automated processing and offline processing data are excluded from the bill by naming it as a digital personal data protection bill. Citizens' personal data is also collected and stored for processing manually. Does it mean that we will require a manual data protection bill? And Supreme Court's order in Puttaswamy is clear that citizens' data in any form should be protected with the same rigor so far as it involves their privacy. So Supreme Court uses the word informational privacy as opposed to digital privacy used in this draft bill, and the effects of the deemed consent. So the draft bill, it proposes deemed consent in the public interest, such as for preventing any fraud, ensuring network and information security, and for fair and reasonable purposes. But it will only be center that will specify what fair and reasonable purposes are. So basically, this is dilution of the citizens' agency to give or retract their consent regarding their own data. So data portability and penalty on the data principles. So as per the draft bill, individuals, they cannot seek porting of their data across platforms, unlike the 2019 bill. So this deficit not only disempowers the data principles by eliminating their right to choose between different data fiduciaries, but also kills competition between data fiduciaries. So there is a penalty of only rupees 10,000 for non-compliance by the data principles with any of the four duties as laid down in the draft bill. Regarding accounts and audit of the Data Protection Board, so there is no provision in the bill for accounts and the external audit of the board, which was there in the earlier bill, and CAG is the agency for auditing. So in absence of a provision for the government audit, the question arises as to whether such audit would be performed by chartered accountants. So in such a case, their audit reports shall not be presented to the parliament and will thus make the board immune to parliamentary oversight. Then regarding harmonization with the cross-sectoral laws, so the draft bill has tried to relax the norms around strict data storage and localization. It sheds little clarity on the mechanism to ensure harmonious interpretation with other sectoral laws. So the bill needs to be in synergy with other laws as well, and incomplete framework of cross-border data flows. So while the bill keeps the terms from cross-border data flows quite open, which would help in negotiating the country-specific requirements in the bilateral trade deals, where data will be an important aspect of negotiation. So it is also prudent to acknowledge that if a country does not find our privacy system adequate as per its policy standards, so this may create barriers to efficient data flow. And absence of privacy by design provisions. So privacy by design requirements, they are conspicuous by their absence. So if it is not built by design into the day-to-day digital ecosystem by all the data fiduciaries, then privacy will not be organically built into our digital ecosystem, and its effectiveness will therefore be suboptimal. So these are the some of the drawbacks of the draft bill. So easing payments for the G20 travelers, so they're eligible to use the UPI platform for making payments. And RBI, it allowed all the inbound travelers from G20 countries to access UPI for the person to merchant payments. And this will be allowed for G20 travelers arriving at select airports. So that is there. We'll take up the Indian Express also today. So here, so we have already taken up this Adani issue and what the Supreme Court has to say on it as of now. Global Investor Summit is happening in UP. So bet in India, its prosperity is key to that of the world. So first time India-US exercise, it includes response to nuke and bioterror attacks. So with the chemical and the biological warfare being recognized as a looming threat to the world, an ongoing India-US joint exercise has for the first time included chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terror response in the drill. So the exercise is named as Tarkash. So that is there, and you need to remember the name and the countries. So, the world's largest radio telescope. Rail tracks are too close. Scientists air the concern for this. So, you can see and have a look at this radio telescope in the picture. This is a giant meter wave radio telescope near Pune. So, when we try to look at its specifications, the GMRT array, there are around 30 parabolic antennas installed in Y fashion across 30 kilometers in a radio quiet region in the Pune district's Narayangaon area. And so apart from that, so it has made a number of path-breaking discoveries and continues to remain a unique global facility. It was majorly upgraded in 2019, and it has achieved highest sensitivity and possesses a capability to peer deeper into the unexplored areas of our universe. So it is a project of the Department of Atomic Energy operating under the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. And it is a unique facility functioning within the frequency bandwidth of 100 megahertz to 1500 megahertz, built and operated by the Tata Institute. And it's a National Center for the Radio Astrophysics, Pune. So it has been built by the National Center for Radio Astrophysics. So, a case of abuse of the minor domestic helper raises questions over the nature of informal employment relations and the need for transparency. So, a Gurgaon based couple was booked for allegedly assaulting and torturing a minor girl who worked for them as domestic help. So, the girl has been admitted to the hospital. And an FIR has also been registered under the sections of IPC, the Juvenile Justice Act, and the Protection of Children from the Sexual Offences Act. And apart from that, so domestic work in India serves as a major and growing employment avenue, especially for the uneducated and unskilled workers from rural areas as well as the urban poor. And according to the government's e-Shram portal, a national database of unorganized workers, so almost 10% of the workers registered, they are engaged as domestic and household workers. And employment in this category tends to be dominated by women, with most of them being migrants. So the work often involves long hours and while the wages in these occupations in urban areas, especially in the major metropolitan centers, may be higher than in the rural areas, implementation of the minimum wage rules remains an unaddressed issue across the country. So these workers, they have little bargaining power to correct this. So those employed in these jobs, they tend to have little access to social protection because obviously they're working in an unorganized sector and informal sector. So at times they're subject to harassment and abuse. So even when there is some sort of legal framework granting these workers some basic rights, low state capacity means that implementation on the ground remains poor. So over the years, there have been growth in the number of private agencies who act as a conduit between the demand and supply ends of the market. And so the functioning remains mostly informal in nature. Most of them fail to provide any form of support, financial or otherwise, to these girls and women. So, as urbanization in India it gathers momentum, as the nuclearization of family rises, as pressure on families of old age care increases, demand for the domestic care work is only likely to escalate in future. And considering the power dynamics at work, these employment spaces and frameworks, they cannot be left scantily regulated. So, all this demands regulation of the sector, bring it under the formal sector, and need to regulate their wages, ensure them some social security, and with a degree of flexibility in the work structure that should be retained. There is a need to address the power imbalance and provide greater protection to these workers, majorly when women are working and they are involved as domestic helps. So ensuring a detailed documentation and greater transparency in the work contracts along with the regular reporting mechanism will be a necessary first steps. So in Pakistan, we are seeing political instability, economic mismanagement. So all that has landed in a debt trap. So it needs a leadership that will build strong economic fundamentals, not one that remains adamant in its rhetoric of conflict with India. So this political instability has resulted in the gross neglect of economic fundamentals for the country. Initially, during the Cold War, it courted the US. Once the Cold War ended, America's Afghan interventions, they came as a boon. And then came China with its CPEC project, China-Pakistan Economic Cooperation, and the country's leadership thrived on this rentier economy, taking money from whoever was willing to pay for the sunrise services. But when the US decided to withdraw from the Afghanistan, and Europe and the Islamic countries, they started distancing themselves from the Pakistani leadership for this involvement in the global terror infrastructure, the country suddenly started feeling the heat. So we have already talked about different economic factors and variables to understand the economic situation of Pakistan. despite the price cap, enough tankers to supply Russian crude to India. So Russia will be cutting the oil output by 5% in March. And many had anticipated that the price cap it could hit the supplies to countries such as India and China, since shippers they had been prohibited from handling Russian crude unless it is sold for less than $60 per barrel. But with Russia's Urals crude trading under the $60 cap, crude has flowed freely into India, and we've talked about our share also when it comes to the import share of Russia into the Indian economy. So that has increased from 1%, which was before this Russia-Ukraine war, to 28% after the war. So Alibaba, it exits India, it offloads remaining 3.4% Paytm stake. So it had a stake in Paytm, so it has completely sold off that. So we saw that the factory output in December, it slowed down to 4.3%. And in this graph, we can again have a look at it, try to understand how it is moving and how it has been performing. So the Indian High Commission, it appealed to students from India to contact the mission for help and counseling amid fears that over 50 of them may have become victims of modern slavery while working at care homes in North Wales run by 5 Indian origin persons. So we have talked about discovery of lithium in Jammu and Kashmir. So how significant is this find and what next? So currently, India is almost entirely dependent on the import of these cells, and the move to ink sourcing packs of lithium is seen as another salve on the front against the imports from China, the major source of both the raw materials and the cells. So again, we're dependent upon China for this. And India is seen as a late mover as it attempts to enter the lithium value chain, coming at a time when the electric vehicles they are predicted to be a sector ripe for disruption. So again, this discovery is going to help us in terms of domestic manufacturing, reducing our import dependence, so helping us on the BOP account as well. So we've already talked about this. So the India-Canada reset. So Ottawa's Indo-Pacific strategy uses the blunt language against China, sees closer engagement with India as critical to its success, and the countries they seek to resuscitate ties that have been in the sick bay for some time now. So the features of the strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategy, basically, China is an increasing disrupted global power. The regional actors, they have complex and deeply intertwined relationships with China. So Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is informed by its clear-eyed understanding of this global China, and Canada's approach is aligned with those of our patterns in the region and around the world. So Beijing increasingly disregards the same international rules and norms that have held China's rise. So in short, Canada is saying it will both unapologetically defend its national interest and cooperate with China when required. So 5 objectives are outlined, which includes promote peace, resilience, and security, expand trade, investment, and supply chain resilience, invest in and connect people, build a sustainable and green future, be an active and engaged partner to the Indo-Pacific. Engagement with India is seen as critical to this strategy. So talking about Canada-India relations, we see that our relations, the relationship is driven by shared values of democracy, pluralism, expanding economic engagement, regular high level interactions, and long standing people to people ties. So, the big issue for India is the safe haven that Canada has been for the Khalistani groups and what New Delhi sees as the liberal parties pandering to these groups for votes. So, Diaspora 6, as well they represented in the Trudeau government. Some of them are politically supported by the pro-Khalistan groups. And we have so Trudeau's visit to India in 2017 was a diplomatic disaster over the Khalistan issue. And last year, Delhi objected to Canada permitting a Khalistani secessionist referendum in the Sikh diaspora and hit back with an advisory against travel in Canada. So, concerns that Canada is slow to act against anti India elements on its soil have been a constant irritant in the relationship. Still, both the countries they seem to realize that any attempt to reset the bilateral ties will need to surmount Canada's vote bank restraints and India's security concerns. So there could also be a defense and security component with Canada's resolve to participate more in the maritime security and exercises in the Indo-Pacific. So the under negotiation EPTA is seen as a stepping stone to a comprehensive economic partnership agreement and may pave the way for a wider reset of ties. Whether this will help to decouple with China is another question. So Article 105 limits to free speech in the parliament and what the Supreme Court has ruled. So Article 105 of the Constitution deals with the powers, privileges, etc. of the houses of parliament and of the members and the committees thereof, and it has 4 clauses. So basically the members of parliament, the MPs, they are protected against any legal action for any statement made or act done in the course of their duties in the house. And this immunity extends to certain non-members as well, such as the Attorney General of India or a minister who may not be a member but speaks in the House. In cases where a member oversteps or exceeds the contours of admissible free speech, the Speaker or the House itself will deal with it as opposed to the court. So the court does not have any role in all these issues. And Article 121 prohibits any discussion in the Parliament regarding the conduct of any judge of the Supreme Court or of a High Court in the discharge of his duties, except upon a motion for presenting an address to the President praying for the removal of the judge. And talking about this privilege, its origin, so the Government of India Act of 1935, it first brought this provision to India with references to the powers and privileges enjoyed by the House of Commons in Britain. And however, unlike India, where the constitution is paramount, Britain follows parliamentary supremacy. So in case of India, the constitution is supreme and paramount, and the privileges of the commons is based in common law, developed over centuries through precedents. So in the Supreme Court in the 1970 ruling, Supreme Court dismissed a plea for damages filed by the followers of the Puri Shankaracharya against the parliamentarians. The judgment recalled that in March 1969, a World Hindu Religious Conference was held at Patna. So the Shankaracharya took part in it and is reported to have observed that untouchability was in harmony with the tenets of Hinduism and that no law could stand in its way and to have walked out when the national anthem was played. So the Supreme Court ruled that the word anything in the Article 105 is of the widest import and is equivalent to everything. And clause 2 of this article reads, no member of the parliament shall be liable to any proceedings in any court in respect of anything said or any vote given by him in the parliament or any committee thereof, and no person shall be so liable in the respect of the publication by or under the authority of either house of the parliament of any report, paper, votes, or proceedings. So basically, the MPs, they are not liable for whatever they say in the parliament in the courts. So in 1998, the Supreme Court answered two questions on parliamentary privileges, broadly relating to questions of corruption. So in 1993, Narasimha Rao was the prime minister of a minority government at the center. So when a vote of no confidence was called by members of the opposition against the government, some factions of the ruling party members, basically the members of the ruling party, they like to vote against the motions. The motion was defeated, and two questions came before the Supreme Court. So one was whether the MPs could claim immunity from prosecution before a criminal court on charges of bribery related to parliamentary proceedings under Article 105, Clause 1 and Clause 2. And second question was whether an MP is a public servant under the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. So a five-judge bench of the Supreme Court ruled that the ordinary law would not apply to the acceptance of a bribe by an MP in case of parliamentary proceedings, broadly interpreted as we think it should be. So Article 105 Clause 2, it protects a member of parliament against the proceedings in court that relate to or which are concerned or have a connection or nexus with anything said or a vote given by him or her in the parliament. So the court rationalized this by saying it will enable the members to participate fearlessly in the parliamentary debates, and these members need the wider protection of immunity against all the civil and the criminal proceedings that bear a nexus to their speech or vote. So basically, they were given the protection under Article 105. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in Sarkari. I hope you have understood all the articles and the minute details that we discussed today. You'll get the PDF link in the description box, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button and share this video as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us.